Thank you all for being trapped here by the rain and deferring beer for another 15 minutes. During the past year, the Museum of Northern Arizona jointly conducted a baseline documentation and feature condition assessment with the National Park Service Flagstaff Area National Monuments at Horseshoe Mesa, which is in the backcountry of Wupatki National Monument. Horseshoe Mesa is in the Crack in the Rock group of sites that are located to the extreme north of Wupatki. They are a series of eroded Moenkopi Formation mesas that form sort of a line north-south. There's about a dozen of these, all of which dip steeply towards the Little Colorado River to the east. Horseshoe Mesa was first recorded in 1931 by the museum's founder, Harold S. Colton. It is one of the type sites that he used to define Kayenta rock art, along with Middle Mesa, Kraken Rock, and Inscription Point. The site was re-recorded in 1983 during the Wupatki Archaeological Inventory Project, at which time they documented 72 panels of rock art, which was the most of any site in Wupatki National Monument. The project was conducted under a Colorado Plateau Cooperative Ecosystems Unit study agreement, and the crews were made up jointly of M&A and NPS archaeologists. So what did we do out there? We took color, high-resolution digital photographs of every single panel. We took black and white photos, film photos of every panel, high-resolution digital photos of every single element. We did scaled illustrations, gigapixel panoramas, which are another form of high-resolution photography, time-lapse photography, and video photography of selected panels. We'll get back to why we might want to look at something that isn't moving with a video. What we found was that maybe the original recording had sort of under-recorded what was actually out there. We found another 51 panels. Two of the original 72 panels could not be relocated, and based on the notes associated with one of those, may not have actually been rock art. It had some ambiguous description and may have really just been spalls. The other one we think was a boulder that had rolled over, perhaps onto the face that had the rock art, because we never found it anywhere. Out of all of these panels, we identified 1,139 individual elements. 10 of these are not petroglyphs. They are either grooves, abraded areas, there's a cupule, and one is a unique biconical hole that is drilled through the corner of a cliff face. And we assume that that probably was used to hold a basket or a pot or something of that nature. The panels, 25 of them have only a single element. At the other extreme of this is panel 30, which is the largest panel at the site, has 88 elements. The typical panel average was 9.4 elements per panel, but there's an interesting breakdown between panels that have 12 or fewer elements and those that have 12 or more. 95 of the panels have 12 or fewer elements. That's 78% of the panels out there. But 754 of the elements out of those 1,129 petroglyph elements are on the other ones that have more than 12 elements. So there's a bimodal distribution here. Most of the panels are pretty small, have just a few elements, but the few panels that are large tend to have the larger and more complex arrangements of elements and the larger elements themselves. Out of these, using the conventional southwestern description of different motifs, we have 72 elements that are anthropomorphs, 417 that are amorphous. We have 5 that we categorized as either too eroded to classify, or that were so ambiguous in what they depicted that they didn't fit our classification scheme. We have 422 geometric elements. We have 17 instances of plants depicted. There are 11 elements that are writing, and some of these, interestingly, are Navajo cattle brands. And we have 185 zoomorphs. Now, to kind of hit the high points, because with that many elements, there's a lot that was going on, we can say that we now have identified an archaic component of the site that was not previously known about. This includes 4 elements that are Glen Canyon linear style bighorn sheep, which dates to the late Archaic according to Christy Turner's classification scheme. And while we were walking around the site, we found a beautiful large Elko corner notch dart point. Previously, they had identified a historic Navajo component to the site. We have dramatically expanded our knowledge of this. They had four panels in 1983 that were attributed to historic Navajo, and these included scenes of multiple horses with flowing manes and tails. There's a wonderful representational scene that has trees, it has a barn or a house, it has a cowboy on horseback, and a line of cattle, all with brands on them. And interestingly, some of these brands are the same ones depicted elsewhere on the site as part of our writing poems. Perhaps one of the more interesting aspects of the Navajo component is one panel that contains 14 elements of geometric designs, and all of these are vertical parallel lines with the space between those lines filled by either a diamondback pattern, basket weave, checkerboard, some sort of repetitive geometric aspect. This also appears on 4 other panels, one of which is the same representational scene I mentioned a moment ago, except that we can see that those geometric elements are beneath the representational part of it. So we know that those are older, but we don't really know what those date to. We do know that the horses with the flowing manes have been dated in Canyon de Chelly and elsewhere to about 1900 or after, because they incorporate a Euro-American representational aesthetic that was not seen previously in Navajo rock art. And there is, in fact, a pretty substantial Navajo occupation of this site in addition to just the rock art. There's a corral, there are some sheep pens on the top of the mesas, and there are some other indications that this was being used to corral animals. However, most of the rock art is ancestral Puebloan. And we were fortunate, while we were doing the field work, in that members of the Hopi Cultural Preservation Office visited us while we were in the field and were able to point out numerous instances of clan symbols, of migration symbols, and other elements of the rock art that tie into Hopi traditions and stories. So this was a really awesome experience because they were very free with us with describing the stories that are tied to this, and it really opened our eyes to the meaning of some of this, which we often have to guess at rather than knowing. We also were able to produce a high-resolution map for the first time. We had a Trimble handheld GPS, so all of the features and all of the rock art is now mapped to sub-meter accuracy, and we're going to take a version of this map that is going to be on display in the Wupatki Visitor Center. It is going to be an interactive display that will allow people who cannot visit the site, because this is the backcountry and it is not open to visitation other than occasional hikes. Some of you may be familiar with the hikes that the Park Service puts on where you can go visit Kraken Rock, Middle Mesa, Horseshoe Mesa. But those are only like 2 or 3 actual hikes a year, and the groups are limited to, I think, 10 people per hike. So there's a very small number of people who actually get the opportunity to see these sites. And before you make a mad rush for joining up on those hikes, you should know that there's a lottery system to get onto them because there are so many people who want to go see these. So if you're not able to do that, going to the visitor center, you will be able to look at the map, click on some of these panels, and see what they look like. I'd like to conclude our discussion about Horseshoe Mesa just by observing that we're going to be going back out this fall. We have a little extra money, and we're going to do the same treatment to Middle Mesa, which is the next one to the north. It's between Kraken Rock Pueblo and Horseshoe Mesa. And we are also going to give a presentation, actually 3 papers, at the upcoming Colorado Plateau Biennial Research Conference, which is going to be in Flagstaff in early October. I mention this because the other thing that we found at Horseshoe Mesa were 4 possible solar observatories. Now, 3 of these have been previously identified by Robert Preston. Some of you may know that following the exciting find of the 3 Slab site or the Sundagger site in Chaco Canyon, a number of people got very excited about southwestern archaeoastronomy. Robert Preston was one. He visited Wupatki in the mid-90s and observed 3 panels at Horseshoe Mesa that he attributed to solstice markers. And we attempted to verify this over the winter solstice. Unfortunately, on the winter solstice, the entire valley of the Little Colorado was socked in with just pea-soup thick fog. We could barely see across the mesa or in front of us. The drive home was pretty exciting, but we were not able to verify the winter solstice aspect. However, we did go out on the vernal equinox and the summer solstice, and I can tell you that one of the panels absolutely is a rather dramatic equinox marker. including a shadow pointer that materializes at exactly 12 noon on the equinox. As the rest of the shadow melts away from the panel, this projects across a large spiral. There's a second shadow that's projected by the cliff that runs along the other element on this panel, which is, interestingly, a series of very carefully pecked discs, 7 to 9 centimeters across, and these are arranged in rows of 2, 3, 2, and 1. And this shadow runs exactly along the diagonal edge of the lower edge of this. During the rest of the day, there's a whole series of complex shadow interactions with that element, with the spiral, and it concludes at the end of the day with the mesa to the west projecting a shadow that rises up across both of these elements, at one point touching the top of one, the very bottom of the other, and then just when you think it's over, the sun comes through a gap in the mesa, comes up and just touches both of them before moving up. So the reason I mention this is that obviously I don't have any visual aids with me up here other than waving my hands. I'm from the East Coast, I talk with my hands. We're going to have some video presentation. We took, as I mentioned, time-lapse of the equinox at this panel, as well as video, and we will be presenting that. I do have to caution you that the conference is fairly expensive. So look for the Colorado Plateau Biennial Conference in Flagstaff in October.